In this video, you're going to learn a key assessment that runners can do which may uncover injury susceptibility. Welcome back, Run Smarter Scholars. Today we are touching on emerging evidence about injury prevention, and this gets me excited because in the past we've had large systematic reviews which have failed to identify the correlation between injury when they correlate things like strength, flexibility, or alignment. And this new research that I'm going to talk about today comes from Eric Hegedus and colleagues, and they conducted a study on 359 collegiate athletes and subjected them to various tests looking at flexibility, mobility, stability, power, and control. And they did all of these tests, and once they tested them, they followed those athletes afterwards throughout their respective seasons and just documented the amount of injuries and which ones ended up developing an injury later on. And surprisingly, they found good motor control was associated with a 59% decrease in the odds of a non-traumatic injury. Okay, granted, this study consisted of many sports and not just runners specifically, but it did have collegiate runners within this study, and it did mention that they found a correlation with non-traumatic injuries. So we're not talking about contact sports. So runners can take a lot away from these particular findings. For those Run Smarter Scholars who want to delve a little bit deeper and check out the paper themselves, I'll leave the link to this particular paper in the description below. So they found a link between motor control tasks and injury or future non-traumatic injuries. So what tasks did they actually do in this study? So 1, they looked at an overhead squat, and 2, they looked at an overhead single leg squat. And the single leg squat was reported to be the most telling, or at least the lead authors said that this test was the most telling. And it's not about the amount of reps that they do, the amount of repetitions, or how strong you are at this task. Instead, it was performing 5 repetitions and assessing the overall quality and observing any particular errors made during that particular motion. Now, the paper itself didn't actually contain the exact criteria that they were searching for. So I reached out to the lead author, I sent him an email and actually retrieved the task instructions and the criteria that they used. So let's go through those task instructions now and exactly what the criteria is for you to score this particular test yourself. Step 1 is to find a chair, a bench, or some sort of stable surface at the height of the center of your knee. Step 2 is to measure and stand 4 to 6 inches in front of the chair, which you can easily mark with a tape measure. Step 3 is to stand on one leg and raise both hands up above your head, shoulder width apart with palms facing each other. Step 4 is to squat down until your buttocks just touch the bench and then come back up without sitting down in between the rep. Step 5 is to repeat this task 5 times. Step number 6 is actually the scoring process, and you can score one particular repetition, and the paper suggests that you use the worst repetition of the last 2. So if you've done 5, you look at the last 2 and then measure which one was the worst, and then once you finish this assessment finding how many errors are in that particular repetition, that will be your overall score. So we're looking for the amount of errors, and errors can be things like a loss of balance, the knee caving in too much, excessive trunk flexion, notable trunk rotation, hip adduction, and heels coming off the ground. Now you can try this particular task yourself and score yourself, and after you do that, comment below on your score and what you found particularly easy or what you found particularly difficult. I'll be really interested in finding your results. Now the next thing to ask is, why is there a link between these motor control issues and non-traumatic injuries? And I interviewed Eric Hegedus, the lead researcher of this paper, on the Run Smarter podcast, and I asked him this exact question, and he said, the number one thing I see in distance runners is gluteus medius weakness, which is a muscle around your hips. When you're standing on one leg, it is the job of the glute medius to keep the knee from buckling to the midline. So what we would see is poor strength and poor motor control. The other thing that I see is a lack of ankle mobility. And if you run out of the ability to flex your ankle during a squat, you pronate your foot, which collapses your arch, and your knee also collapses to the midline. So essentially, we're looking at strength deficits around the hips and we're looking at mobility deficits around the ankle. And all of these particular traits play a role in poor motor control. So if you have scored poorly on this test, there are some exercises you can do which will theoretically reduce your risk of future injury if we extrapolate the findings from this particular paper. So if your heels are lifting off the ground in this task, then we need to work on your ankle mobility. For example, you can do knee to wall bounces. You can do this mobility exercise for 60 seconds and do that 3 times a day. For glute muscle strength, there are tons of exercises you can do, but I'm going to share a beginner, intermediate, and sort of advanced example for you. So as a beginner, you can start with crab walks. Once they become a bit too easy, or if you want to just progress and make it more challenging, you can then progress to a single leg squat with a Swiss ball. So pressing your knee into that Swiss ball and activating your glutes really strongly, but this is quite advanced. If you want to go one step further, you can also add a wobble board into this exercise and make it extremely difficult. But once you get good at this, you're going to become very good at a single leg overhead squat. If you enjoy these injury prevention tips, I'll be sure to create future videos whenever I come across any more of these hidden gems. So make sure you subscribe and you won't miss a thing.